My sister danced with my husband, smiling like I was already buried. By dawn, I was gone. And the documents that would bring them both to their knees. My name's Eliana. And last Saturday night, I watched my own sister slow dance with my husband under a chandelier I paid for while guests whispered like I was already dead. They thought I'd break down, cry, beg. Instead, by sunrise, I was gone. And with me, I took every secret they never knew I kept. The kind of secrets that don't just burn bridges, they level entire foundations. Before we dive in, tell me, what time are you listening and where from? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. Now let me tell you what really happened the night I vanished. The first thing I noticed was the silence behind the smiles. I stepped into the ballroom of the Fairmont in Austin, clutching a small silver box wrapped with a dusty blue ribbon. Inside was a bracelet I'd custom ordered for Malis, a pale aquamarine stone set in gold, her birthstone. It wasn't expensive, but it carried a quiet weight, like me. I wore our mother's old pearl pin on the collar of my navy wrap dress. The fabric was soft and modest. I hadn't bought anything new for the event. Truthfully, I hadn't even planned on coming, but something in me, perhaps old duty, perhaps the last shred of hope, pushed me through the doors. The air was filled with champagne giggles and piano jazz, but when I walked in, conversations faltered just for a second, then resumed like nothing had changed. "Hey, Eliana," someone muttered with a distracted half-smile. I nodded back, unsure if they were actually speaking to me. No one offered to take my coat. No one reached for the gift. I stood at the entrance for what felt like too long, clutching the box like a lifeline, my fingers going numb. I scanned the room for Malis. My sister. My only sister. My beautiful, dangerous sister. She was across the room, laughing, radiant under the chandelier. Cassian, my husband, stood beside her, his hand resting far too comfortably on the small of her back. I walked in farther, found an empty spot near the drink table, and took a sip of water. Not wine. Not tonight. I told myself I was just here to celebrate, to smile, and to leave early. No trouble. No fuss. That promise broke 10 minutes later. The music slowed. From the stage someone announced a special dance just for our glowing bride-to-be. Bride-to-be. Malis turned, her sequined gown catching the light like ice. Cassian held out his hand to her, bold, casual, and she took it, like she'd been waiting. They stepped into the middle of the room under a pale spotlight. The music began. Frank Sinatra, of course. The Way You Look Tonight. A love song. They moved like they'd done it 1,000 times. She leaned into him, her head against his chest. He whispered something and she laughed like a schoolgirl. The kind of laugh that made people turn and smile. People began recording. "She's really close with him," someone near me said. And then I saw it. The pearl pin. Not on me. On her. My throat went dry. The pin. I had handed it to her last Christmas. Not because she asked, but because she cried and said she missed Mom. I'd wrapped it in tissue paper, told her it was a symbol. Something to keep us connected, I said. But Malis never believed in symbols. She believed in ownership. I stood frozen. My hands clenched at my sides. My heart wasn't racing. It was folding in on itself. Cassian caught my eye. For a second, I thought he'd pull away, that he'd feel some sliver of shame. But no. He smirked, like a man who knew he wouldn't be challenged. He twirled her. Laughter erupted around them. Phones caught every angle. Someone said behind me, "Isn't that her husband?" Then came the toast. Mala stood by the stage, a flute of champagne in one hand. "Thank you all for being here tonight. To my amazing family, my incredible fiancé, Cassian, you've been such a support through everything." There was clapping. No one turned toward me. My name was never spoken, not once. I set the gift box on a table. I didn't drink the wine, didn't touch the food, didn't say goodbye. I walked out into the Texas night with nothing but the dress on my back and a silence so loud it rang in my ears, and that's how I disappeared, before the cake was even cut. That night, the world thought I'd just gone home. They didn't know I had a plan. I drove through the quiet streets of Austin with both hands steady on the wheel, though nothing else about me felt steady. My phone lit up on the passenger seat, Cassian's name flashing again and again. No voicemails, just calls. I didn't answer. I didn't even turn it face down. I let it blink, fade, then blink again like some pathetic flare from a man who knew the ship was sinking and still tried to act surprised. The yellow glow of the street lights blurred into streaks as I passed. I wasn't crying. I hadn't cried all night. It wasn't numbness. It was more like preservation. As if even my tear ducts knew I had to keep everything contained until I was safe. But the images kept cycling like a broken film reel. Her fingers on his chest, his hand settling too low on her back, that smirk, and the pin, that damn pin, winking under the lights like it belonged there. By the time I turned into the cul-de-sac, the world was asleep. My porch light was off. Cassian's truck wasn't in the driveway. Inside, everything looked the same, too much the same. I kicked off my shoes and dropped my clutch on the console table by the door. My heels had left faint blisters I hadn't noticed earlier. As I passed the hallway, I noticed his duffel bag was gone. It wasn't his usual overnight gym bag. This was the larger one, the one he used when we went to Arizona for our anniversary, and the drawer where he kept his spare car keys, cracked open, empty. I exhaled through my nose and set my keys down. Then I checked my phone again, this time with purpose. One new voice memo, not from Cassian, from Malice. I sat on the edge of the couch before hitting play. Her voice was syrupy, slurred just enough to betray the champagne. You were never meant for him, Elle. You were just the preview. There was a giggle, muffled music, the faint clinking of glasses. I mean, come on. You saw us tonight. It's like we finally got to stop pretending. The message ended with the sound of someone calling her name in the background, probably Cassian. I stared at the wall across from me for a full minute. Then I forwarded the voice memo to both my work email and my backup drive. I also saved it to the cloud under a new encrypted folder named for later. When I stood, I noticed a kind of quiet that didn't belong in a house with two people. I walked through the living room and down the hall toward the bedroom. As soon as I opened the door, I knew. Half the closet was empty. His drawers, yanked open, some still dangling crookedly, were stripped of everything. Belts, socks, dress shirts, gone. I opened the bathroom vanity. His toothbrush was missing. The cologne I bought him for Christmas, gone. The expensive hair trimmer he swore was too fancy to travel with, gone too. There was no note, not even a text. Just the kind of absence you could smell, like something had been ripped away too fast, leaving heat and static in its place. I walked over to my desk in the corner of the room, opened my laptop, and logged into our joint bank account. The number glared up at me. 43,000, withdrawn just 6 hours earlier, all in one transaction. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I pulled out a pad of paper and started a checklist. Lock credit cards, freeze bank accounts, call attorney, separate business assets. I paused on that last one, business. I headed out to the backyard, flipping the patio lights on as I went. The spring air was crisp. The wind stirred the jasmine vines that curled along the fence. The fire pit was still warm. That's when I saw it. Blackened corners of papers poked out between the logs, charred, but not completely gone. I crouched down and pulled one free. My licensing agreement, signed, stamped, mine, another scrap, my original product sketches still faintly visible through the burn. He hadn't just taken the money. He tried to erase my name from my own work. That man had watched me pull 16-hour days for 2 years straight, watch me present prototypes, deal with lawyers, pitch investors. And now, without saying a single word, he tried to vanish it all into ash. I stood up slowly. I didn't shake. I didn't cry. I walked back inside, poured a glass of water, and sat at my desk. I clicked open a folder labeled Insurance. It asked for a passcode. I entered it. Inside were scanned copies of every contract, email threads, NDAs, recordings, time-stamped photos, investor lists, a folder labeled Miley's June. I'd made it a habit to back up everything after the second time he accidentally deleted my files. The night felt heavy. But my chest felt still settled, like something ancient had shifted. I had let them rewrite me once, but this time, I'd be the one holding the pen. The next morning, I didn't cry. I documented everything. I had slept for maybe 2 hours, if that. When the sky started to lighten just past 5:30, I was already in the kitchen, standing at the window watching the edges of the clouds burn pink. My coffee sat untouched. It had gone cold long ago. The house felt empty, not just in the physical sense. Cassian's belongings were gone, but what struck me more was how the silence echoed inside me. As if something that had been buried for years was finally clawing its way up from the floorboards. My phone vibrated against the counter. I didn't even look at the screen until it stopped buzzing. One message from my mother. "Did you cause a scene, Eliana? Not, are you okay? Not even a, what happened? Just that, did you embarrass the family?" It was such a classic line that I almost laughed, but there was nothing funny about it anymore. Nothing surprising. I deleted the message, and yet the memories came anyway. I remembered being 12, spending weeks building a miniature working wind turbine for the regional science fair. Melis had wandered into my room the night before the judging and asked if she could help with the finishing touches. The next morning, she arrived at the exhibit early, with my project in tow, her name on the placard. She won first prize. I stood behind the judges, watching her accept the medal. She didn't even look in my direction, or the time we celebrated my high school graduation at a restaurant, and my father raised his glass to toast Melis for always making the family proud, even though the night was supposed to be about me. His reason? Melis just presents herself better. Every milestone that should have been mine had been diluted, blurred, or outright stolen. And I'd kept telling myself that being the bigger person was noble. That humility was strength. That love, even when it went unreciprocated, still counted for something. Maybe it did. But what it didn't do was protect me, because last night wasn't the first time Melis had crossed the line with Cassian either. I'd seen the signs. At our engagement party, she'd brushed a stray eyelash from his cheek. I'd caught her fixing his tie before I could even reach him, and I remembered the way she looked at me when I noticed, like I was in her way, and I, naively, desperately, had chosen to believe her smile was just teasing, just family being close. I'd once told myself that I was just sensitive, that I was reading too much into things. Cassian had said so too. But when I sat on the edge of the bed that morning, I remembered something else. A therapy session from about a year ago. I'd been exhausted, on the verge of burnout, and my friend had insisted I try speaking to someone. The therapist had asked me, "Eliana, do you feel invisible in your own marriage?" I laughed at the time, shrugged it off. Now the words clung to me like cold breath on glass. Not just invisible, but erased. In my mind's eye, I replayed the moment Melis leaned in and whispered something to Cassian on the dance floor. He'd laughed. She'd smirked. It had seemed meaningless then. Now it mirrored a moment from our honeymoon, when I had said something private to him in the same way, and he'd called it the most intimate moment of our trip. What else had she mirrored? What else had she taken and made hers? The clock on the wall read 7:12 a.m. I got up, took a deep breath, and opened my laptop. Emails had piled up overnight. A few notifications from my assistant, some basic updates from suppliers, one flagged message forwarded at 2:34 a.m. It was from my assistant Lydia with the subject line, "You didn't authorize this. Right?" I clicked it open. The message she had forwarded was from Melis, sent using my name, my business email. The signature was forged, identical except for the hyphen in my middle name, which I always omitted, but the revision was clear. It was a revised licensing agreement for one of our key IP partnerships. Instead of sending royalties to my company, it rerouted them quietly to a shell entity in Melis's name. It had been prepared and sent to the legal department just hours before the engagement party. This wasn't just petty sabotage, this was theft. Calculated, cold, filed with precision and confidence under the assumption that I was too soft, too blind, too loyal to ever notice. I stared at the timestamp again, 4:48 p.m., before she even stepped into that ballroom wearing my pin, before she slow danced with my husband in front of everyone I once considered family. She already thought she'd won, But here's the thing about underestimating someone like me. You assume silence means weakness. You assume forgiveness means defeat, but I had something Milas never did. Memory, documentation, and time. I wasn't just a discarded wife. I was a target, and they thought I'd never fight back. The words still rang in my head as I stepped onto the cracked pavement outside the co-working space downtown. I wasn't a discarded wife. I was a target, and they thought I'd never fight back. The morning had already climbed to a slow, humid wait. Austin spring didn't offer much relief, but my mind was sharper than it had been in months. I walked past the glass doors into the shared workspace I used occasionally. The receptionist, an older woman named Brenda, nodded at me with faint recognition. "Meeting room 2C, she said, not even needing me to ask. Dr. Julian Renly sat at the far end of the room. His suit was a soft gray. Understated, but firm, just like him. He'd mentored me during my early business structuring days, sharp as a scalpel. Retired now technically, but still the kind of man you called when something wasn't adding up. "Eliana," he greeted with that same calm voice he'd always had. "You look like someone who's had enough." "That obvious?" He gave a dry chuckle. "When you emailed me at 4 a.m., asking about silent transfers and forged signatories, I figured it wasn't just curiosity." I sat down, folding my hands on the table. "I need to know how deep they went." I said, "Cassian, Mollis, I think they're trying to take over everything." Julian didn't ask questions he didn't already know the answer to. He just opened a folder, slid it across the table. Inside were printed records, paper still warm from the printer. 3 months ago, while I was at a silent retreat in Arizona, no phone, no email, no outside contact. A power of attorney form had been submitted. My digital signature was on it. It authorized Cassian to make temporary administrative decisions regarding equity structure and intellectual property licensing. And in the weeks that followed, share ownership in my company had been diluted. Not by much, just enough to allow for strategic reallocation. Strategic reallocation. A euphemism as vile as it sounded. My name had been pushed down on the ownership hierarchy. Cassian and Melis now held collective control. "You've got 2 choices," Julian said, his tone low. "Fight loud or fight smart." I exhaled slowly. "What smart look like?" He tilted his head. "Quiet audits, paper trails, evidence, and then time your strike when they can't counter." I left with more papers than I could carry comfortably and a pounding behind my eyes. I didn't cry. I didn't scream, but I did go home and dig. A part of me had always prepared for something like this. I wish I could say it was foresight, but truthfully, it was self-preservation. I had learned early that in my family, trust was something you kept behind lock and key, literally. In a box in the back of my closet, under layers of scarves and journals, I found the old USB stick labeled Q1 footage. It was dusty, nearly forgotten. But the moment I clicked it into my laptop, the file loaded instantly. It was from the earliest days of our company before the name was even finalized. A meeting in the garage of my old place, back when I believed we were building something together. The video quality was grainy, but the audio, crystal. Melis's voice rang out laughing. "You just have to keep her busy with sweet words and symbolic gifts. Eliana's not the type to push. That's what makes her useful." In the frame, Cassian smiled and sipped his beer. "She keeps the engines running. We take the wheel when it matters." I didn't move, didn't breathe. This wasn't just betrayal. It was exploitation. Premeditated, collaborative, and cruel. The file timestamp showed it was saved the same week I signed the initial equity structure. The same week Melis had given me that expensive journal and called me the soul of the vision. I backed up the video to 3 separate drives. I uploaded it to a secure cloud, then I deleted every trace of it from the USB, reformatting the stick before placing it back in the box. If they ever got curious, they'd find nothing. Then I walked to the mirror in my hallway, the same one I passed every morning but hadn't looked into in weeks. There I was. Same jawline, same soft brown eyes, but the woman staring back had something else now, clarity. "They want a version of me that doesn't exist anymore," I said aloud. The silence that followed felt clean. By late afternoon, I booked a one-way ticket, Mendocino. To think. That's what I told my mother when she texted later. Going up the coast to clear my head, I wrote. No signal. Don't worry. But I wasn't going to think. I was going to plan. I wasn't running. I was rising. I booked a one-way ticket, but not to run. I was about to become the version of me they'd hoped stayed buried. The Mendocino coastline stretched out beneath me like a living watercolor, cool grays and restless blues melting into each other. I stood by the window of the tiny rental I'd booked, holding my coffee like it might warm more than my hands. It didn't. The bag I hadn't unpacked sat beside the armchair, slouched like I felt. I knelt to zip it up fully and something caught, wedged between two journals. There it was, a letter. My name on the front in my grandfather's deliberate handwriting. I paused. My fingers trembled, not from fear, but from the strange certainty that whatever it said it would matter. I opened it slowly. Eliana, if you're reading this, then it means time did what it does. I always told you to be kind, but not blind. Love is not license, and the ones closest to you will try to dress theft as care. Document everything. Protect your name. Enclosed, a notarized copy of your co-ownership clause. I witnessed it myself. I love you. Stay sharp, Grandpa. I let the letter fall gently into my lap. The weight of his words pressed harder than grief had when we buried him. His voice echoed in my chest, firm, protective, and always just ahead of the storm. I folded the clause twice and slid it into my laptop sleeve. It felt like a weapon sheathed in cotton. Hours passed, or maybe only minutes. The lines blurred after that. I curled up on the worn couch, knees to chest, still in yesterday's jeans. I let the tears come, not for them, but for me. For the woman I had silenced in the name of keeping peace. For the parts of me I handed over to people who smiled with their teeth but spoke with knives. Maybe I thought being loved meant being useful, or quiet, or pleasing. Maybe that's what they counted on. I wiped my cheeks and sat up straighter. No more maybe. The USB stick sat in the dish beside the TV remote, like it had always belonged there. I plugged it into the laptop, the file loaded with its familiar flicker. Melis's voice again, laughing. Cassian's nodding silence. The smirk. This time I didn't flinch. I uploaded it to 3 new folders, encrypted, hidden behind names only I would recognize. One set was cloud-based, the second offline. The third, stored on a drive tucked beneath the wooden floorboard under the fridge. If someone ever tried to erase me again, they'd find themselves chasing smoke. The next morning, I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I dressed in black, simple, sharp. I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize my own eyes. Then I drove down the coast, letting the miles stretch out the knots in my chest. By the time I stepped onto the rooftop in Oakland, the sun was beginning to tilt toward dusk. The city buzzed below like a secret everyone was in on. Cassian and Melis were seated at the long table, surrounded by people in polished shoes and designer watches. The clink of silverware, the of thin laughter. I didn't wait to be seen. I walked up and stood at the head of the table. It took 3 seconds for Cassian to notice me. His jaw tightened. Milo's eyebrows arched, but she didn't flinch. Eliana, she said, the tone too smooth. What a surprise. I figured I'd drop by, I said, reaching for an empty glass. This looked like a celebration. Cassian half stood. We're in the middle of a private to long games, I said, raising the glass in short memories. Melis's smile twitched. I reached into my purse, pulled out a napkin, and placed it in front of Cassian, folded neatly on it, a printed image of the forged signature from the transfer form. It was off by just 1 letter, an L swapped for a capital I, something a stranger wouldn't catch. Something a sister should have known better than to fake. Tell Milos next time she signs my name, I said. She should spell it right. The table went silent. Someone dropped a fork. I didn't wait for the replies. I turned and walked away, my heels steady on the concrete. No shouting, no slaps, no courtroom drama, just a napkin, a quiet line, and a truth too sharp to ignore. The elevator doors opened as I approached, and I didn't even look back, but I knew they were watching. I could feel the heat of it between my shoulder blades, and I knew what would come next. So did they. But what they didn't know. The next move was theirs, but I had already made mine 3 days ago. By the time the boardroom filled with murmurs and the scent of polished wood polish in San Francisco's financial district, I had already been awake for hours. I didn't fly in. I didn't need to. A well-timed virtual entrance would say more than any pair of heels ever could. They'd chosen to meet without me as if I'd already been written out, but I knew Cassian. I knew how he operated. Bluff, posture, charm, then pressure. I waited until he stood at the front of the conference table gesturing to slides that painted himself as the strategic genius behind Hemlock Bioworks. My company, my code, my late nights and sacrificed weekends. Then I clicked Join Meeting. The screen behind him flickered once, then I appeared. Cassian froze, his hand mid-air. "Good morning," I said evenly. "I believe I'm still listed as a co-founder, majority vote holder, if we're splitting hairs." Dead silence, then a cough. I uploaded the notarized clause directly into the call's shared drive. Dated 3 years ago, witnessed by Judge Horace Hemlock. That would be my grandfather for those unfamiliar. One of the older board members, Marlene Whitaker, leaned forward and squinted at her tablet. Her brows drew together. "Why weren't we told about this clause?" Cassian opened his mouth. Nothing came out. His neck flushed red. I didn't raise my voice. "Because no one asked who built the company. You only asked who signed the checks." Marlene's lips pressed together. Then she nodded. And just like that, my seat at the table was no longer up for debate. After the call ended, I opened a secure browser and filed the motion. The joint marital business account, Cassian and I, had set it up when we merged assets for Hemlock. He always said, "Transparency builds trust." Turns out, he meant my transparency, not his. My motion cited forgery, unauthorized signature usage, and breach of fiduciary trust. I attached the relevant files, logs, and a flagged timestamp showing digital tampering from Melis's device. The bank's compliance team acted swiftly. 3 hours later, I got the confirmation, account status, frozen. A minute after that, Melis tried to move $50,000 from the media allocation line item. Her screen blinked. Access denied. Legal hold. Authority, E. Hemlock. I imagined the look on her face, the clenched jaw, the manicured finger tapping her phone screen in disbelief. Somewhere in a penthouse suite with floral arrangements and iced matcha, she was finally learning what it felt like to lose. Cassian texted at 11:47 a.m. "You've made your point. Back down before this gets ugly." I stared at the screen, then typed, "You're mistaken. That wasn't my point. That was just the introduction." No emoji, no signature, just facts. I scrolled to the contact saved under Grandpa's name, not him, of course. He was gone. But his longtime clerk, Edmund Reyes, had become a federal ethics auditor. He'd always said, "Corruption leaves fingerprints. You just have to know where to dust." I called. He picked up on the second ring. "Eliana? I need help reviewing some asset movements," I said. "And I have a list of board votes that, well, they feel more like patterns than strategy." His tone changed. "I'm listening." We set a time. Later that day, I took a slow drive north. The coastal traffic gave way to winding turns and sun-dappled silence beneath the redwoods. I rolled the window down, let the breeze comb through my hair. A voicemail I hadn't played in years surfaced from my saved archive. It was Grandpa. His voice crackled with that calm certainty that never faltered, not even in his final months. "You are not hard to love, sweetheart. You are hard to fool, and that's a blessing in the right hands." I didn't realize I'd been holding my breath until that moment. My hands tightened on the wheel, and for the first time in years, I smiled without pain trailing behind it. They had tried to erase me from every decision, but the woman they erased had just become the shadow behind every consequence. It had been a week since I turned the tide in that boardroom, and in truth, I hadn't slept the same since. Not because I was restless, but because for the first time, I no longer flinched in anticipation of the next betrayal. I anticipated it. I studied it. I dismantled it before it arrived. So when the invitation to the Hemlock Family Foundation Gala never came, I wasn't surprised. I had already seen the guest list. My name was nowhere on it, but I showed up anyway. The ballroom at the Fairmont gleamed with soft chandeliers and carefully arranged floral displays, deep red roses and white orchids. The kind Malice liked to pair to symbolize legacy and vision. She once said those words to a journalist like she coined them. Tonight was meant to celebrate our family's contributions to science education and literacy programs across California. The ones I spent 5 years building in classrooms, living rooms, sometimes literal barns in underserved communities. I stood in the back dressed in black, quiet, unnoticed, until the video montage began. My name didn't appear once. There were stock photos of children learning with tablets, images of Malice handing out books she didn't write, quotes I'd written now in her voice, misattributed. Guests around me tilted their heads. Wait, one whispered. Wasn't that Eliana Hemlock's project? Another leaned closer, brows knitted. She's here? A man in a navy tuxedo turned sharply, eyes wide. Eliana? You're here? I smiled without showing teeth. I never left. Melos took the stage in a shimmering silver dress that caught every spotlight. Thank you all for supporting the Hemlock Foundation, she began. This journey started with a vision. Mine, to bring STEM education to the communities that need it most. Her voice poured honey. Her smile rehearsed. Behind her, the screen flickered once. Then again, a new file loaded. A title slide appeared. Origin, the founding of Hemlock Literacy. I had uploaded it under a dormant admin account, one I'd created years ago and never deleted. It was a digital ghost, forgotten, but still alive, like me. The audience gasped as the first images rolled, me, 10 years younger, hauling boxes of tablets into a broken-down trailer that served as our first mobile classroom. My signature on the nonprofit registration, a clip of a rural girl reading aloud under a string of Christmas lights. Then came the legal timestamp filed under Eliana Hemlock, executive director and founder. The final slide read, "You can edit history, but the metadata stays loyal." Malice's mic was still on. She stood there frozen, lips parted, unsure whether to keep speaking or fake a tech failure. I walked forward. No rush. No spectacle. Just purpose. Pinned to my lapel was a simple rosewood pin, the same one my grandfather gave me on the day of our first funding grant. He said it represented service over show. Malice once called it cheap, told me not to wear it to donor meetings. But tonight, donors leaned in when they saw it. Some touched their own lapels in memory of Grandpa Horace's legacy. I met Malice's eyes, but didn't stop at the podium. Just past her. Just enough. She didn't follow. Outside, the air had that cool edge San Francisco carries in early spring. The valet brought my car around slow as molasses. Cassian's voice came from my left, low and bitter. This is war. I turned my head slightly. No, I said. This is accounting. I'm just fixing the books you doctored. He opened his mouth, but the words didn't come. His fists clenched at his sides like the threat of violence might reclaim what charm had lost. I stared at him, even unwavering, and for the first time since I married him, he looked away first. I turned back toward the valet stand, but before I could reach the car, I saw it. A streak of deep red under the wiper, a single envelope. And on the front, in Melusa's handwriting were the words, "I warned you not to humiliate me." The envelope was the color of dried blood. I didn't open it right away. I just stared at it under the street lamp glow, my breath fogging against the cool glass. Something in me already knew it wouldn't be another insult or veiled threat. It would be war, open, legal, and cruel. Inside was a court summons, filed under emergency motion, request for temporary custody of minor, petitioners, Malice, Hemlock and Cassian Hemlock, allegations, mental instability, emotional neglect, unfit parental capacity. They hadn't just tried to erase my name, now they were trying to steal my son. I didn't sleep that night. I packed my documents, set 3 alarms, and pressed my grandfather's rosewood pin into my blazer like armor. At 9 a.m., I walked into the San Francisco County Courthouse, jaw locked and breath steady. The courtroom was half filled, mostly lawyers and quiet watchers, but it might as well have been a stadium. Across the aisle, Malus and Cassian sat shoulder to shoulder, their lawyers flipping through glossy folders. They didn't glance at me. The judge, a woman in her 60s with silver-streaked hair and eyes that had seen through more lies than she'd ever bother counting, called it to order. The first blow landed fast. A printed copy of Therapy Concerns dated 6 months ago, notes from a session that was never public, never shared. I knew that file. I knew the handwriting. It was my old therapist's, and it was stolen. Cassian's lawyer claimed concern. Given her isolation, her recent outbursts, and questionable decisions, we fear for the child's well-being. Miles added with a practiced tremble, she hasn't let anyone see him. We're family. We're trying to protect him. I stood when it was my turn. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. Instead, I opened the folder that had been locked in my grandfather's safe, the one his estate attorney handed me the morning after his funeral, with a single instruction: only open if they ever come for your child. Inside was everything. A notarized guardianship letter naming me sole legal parent and financial guardian, documentation of Cassian's past threats, including a voicemail where he'd said, "If you don't comply, I'll make sure you lose everything, including him." But what silenced the room was the trust clause, signed by my grandfather, witnessed, sealed. It stated that if any member of the family attempted to sabotage or defame me for financial gain, all inherited assets would be rerouted to me as trustee. Full control. No contestation. The judge read silently, lips tightening with each page. Then she said it. Calm, clear, final. All claims denied. And you too may want to retain separate counsel moving forward. Malus blinked like someone just slapped her without touching her. Cassian didn't move. Outside, the world had shifted. Reporters swarmed as the courtroom doors opened. "Miss Hemlock, is it true they tried to seize your son?" "Eliana, how long were these threats going on?" I didn't answer. I took my son's hand, his small fingers wrapping mine, and walked straight through the chaos like it was fog parting for us. Cassian's law firm released a statement that same hour. Internal ethics review launched. Malus's foundation page went dark by noon, most of their corporate sponsors pulling out within hours. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. My son squeezed my hand. "Are we going home?" I looked up at the sky, blue and wide above the plaza. "Yeah, baby. We are." Later that evening, when the courthouse dust had settled and the press vans cleared, I sat alone on the back porch. The sunlight stretched long over the wood planks. My rosewood pin caught a slant of gold light, the grain glinting. "They danced like I wasn't there," I whispered, more to the wind than to anyone else. But I was the one who built the floor they danced on. I just decided to pull it out from under them quietly. The moment lingered whole. Then came the knock at the door, not the sharp kind, not urgent, just familiar. I walked over and opened it. On the welcome mat lay a single envelope, cream-colored, aged at the edges. My name was written in a hand I hadn't seen in years. It was from my mother. It was the same delicate script I remembered from childhood, curved letters with hesitant pauses, like she had always been unsure how much space she was allowed to take up on the page. My name was spelled in full this time, not the clipped E she used when she was upset, Eliana. The envelope was postmarked from nearly 2 years ago. Somehow, it had been buried beneath a stack of probate documents from my grandfather's estate, sealed, misfiled, then found only weeks after the courtroom storm had passed. I didn't open it right away. I waited until I was sitting on a weathered bench overlooking the sea in Monterey, the Pacific crashing below like it had something to say, but didn't care if anyone listened. The late afternoon sun had that golden hue that softened sharp memories into something almost kind. The letter wasn't an apology. It was something far more dangerous. It was honest. Malus needed me more, or so I thought. Maybe because she was louder about it. "You always stood on your own, but now I see, standing alone doesn't mean you're not breaking inside. I should have seen that. I should have seen you. I was afraid of your strength, Eliana, because it showed me everything I wasn't." There were no grand confessions, no pleas for forgiveness, just a truth whispered too late. I folded the letter carefully and tucked it into the journal I kept with me now. It wasn't closure, not exactly, but it was the closest my mother and I would ever come. A month had passed since the court ruling. Since Cassian's smirk had finally disappeared for good, he left the country the next day, citing professional opportunities abroad. In reality, he was dodging subpoenas. Malis had gone quiet too. Her foundation site blinked offline with a curt statement, pausing operations for personal reflection. Translation: the donors pulled out, the scandal grew teeth, and no one wanted to be seen holding hands with a fraud. But I didn't follow them anymore. I had other things to build. The counseling center we launched 2 weeks ago bore my grandfather's name, the Hemlock House for Quiet Recovery. It sat in an old converted coastal building surrounded by native gardens and shaded by tall eucalyptus. We didn't take photos. We didn't post stories online. People came when they were ready. We were there when they arrived. I used a portion of the reclaimed estate to fund its first 2 years. No fanfare. No headlines. Just a single logo above the entrance, a rosewood pin carved into the shape of a flame. Steady, not fierce. Some of the women who came through the doors recognized the symbol, most didn't. That was okay. It wasn't about legacy anymore. It was about rebuilding. Today, my son sat next to me on the beach. He was drawing something in the sand with a twig while I let the sea wind tangle my hair. He glanced up and said, "This stick reminded me of your pin." I looked at the piece of rosewood he'd found near the drift line, small, imperfect, bent slightly in the middle, like it had survived something but still chose to keep growing. I smiled. It does look like it. It reminds me we can grow again. From where we were broken. He laid the twig next to my shoe, careful like it was something sacred. A seagull called overhead. A couple wandered by with their dog. Somewhere behind us, wind chimes from a beachfront cafe played something faint and out of tune. I didn't need music anymore or crowds. What I had now was quiet. Not the kind that leaves you lonely, but the kind you earn. The kind that comes when the fight is over, and you're finally able to sit in your own life, uninvited by anyone, unwanted by none. Because you built this part. Every inch of it. I ran my fingers along the edge of the journal in my lap. The rosewood pin sat inside the front cover now, its weight grounding, not burdensome. Sometimes when the music fades and the crowd vanishes, what's left is what was always real.